Welcome to our next episode on geopolitics with Alex. And this is very much an episode where I'd like to wrap up the year, but from a specific perspective. You will have probably noticed in my lectures that I'm quite the eternal optimist. I quite often see the silver lining of different situations and want to look at things from a positive perspective. And I hope you will not be mad at me for doing it once again, because after all, this is very much the holiday season, end of the year story. And in this episode, I will argue that the past year has actually been pretty good for democracy and pretty bad for autocracy. Let me explain. Now, you all know that we have about 200 nation states in the world, around 6-7 continents. And all of us have a different history, different traditions, different cultures. But there is something that unites all of us, with and without borders, and that is that we want to find the best form of governance. So, we want to live in a state or in a country or in a region that, basically is able to deliver. Now, of course, it means different things for different people. So I, for instance, believe very strongly in freedom. I believe in liberal democracy. I believe in social market economy. I believe in equality, in justice, in human rights, and basically that we create societies where you're able to fulfill yourself, and welfare states which then take care of you if you fall through the net. Now, I'm not saying that everyone believes that, but I come from a part of the world where that's very much the thinking, and it seems to be a fairly good form of governance. Now, in its most simple form, of course, when you talk about governance, it's about democracy versus autocracy. That's the political system. And then it's a question of what kind of public goods does the political system allocate and give you, and how equally or unequally does it distribute. We've seen that in autocracies, autocrats are usually quite rich and populations are usually quite poor. It's not that simple, but that's the starting point. Because of course, sometimes there are philosopher kings or enlightened autocrats that don't live in a democracy and are still able to generate wealth and social welfare and good education systems, and distribute it fairly equally. Now, there are many indicators that we can look at. We can look at economic growth. Is a country doing good or bad? We can look at well-being. Is the general population doing well? Do they have long and healthy lives? Are they taken care of by the education system and health system? Do they feel secure? And these are all indicators that we look at. Now, if we look at the post-Cold War era, remember early in the lecture series we talked about one of my favorites, Francis Fukuyama, who wrote a wonderful book based on an essay originally about the end of history, where he was arguing that, perhaps this could be a moment when all of these 200 nation states start moving towards a system of governance which is about liberal democracy, about social market economy, and globalization. Now, of course, it's quite often also about, do you believe in individual freedom or do you believe in the collective, or who is able to define what the collective actually is? But you remember, just going back a year or two, there was very much this narrative that, democracy is quite messy. The financial crisis wasn't that good. Brexit took place. The election of Donald Trump, the asylum crisis was badly managed. And a lot of people started to look at, countries like China. It was going from strength to strength. There was continuous growth between 6 to 10%. People were lifted from poverty. The country was able to modernize. And it was based on a system of state capitalism, perhaps a little bit more than social market economy, and certainly very much about belief in the collective rather than the individual. So people started to say that democracies are not doing that well. And we had our own problems in the European Union as well. Hungary being a prime example perhaps of a country or a leader in Viktor Orban that doesn't believe in liberal democracy but pushes very much illiberal democracy and challenges the judicial system and free speech. Now, why do I then argue that this year has been good for democracy? Well, let me just give you a little list. The first one is to say that Emmanuel Macron was re-elected as the president of France. Remember that his counterpart was Marine Le Pen, who comes from a nationalist extreme right. United Kingdom, the year started with Boris Johnson, continued with Liz Truss. Perhaps you could argue that Rishi Sunak, who is now the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, will have brought some stability to the system. Third, I've never seen the European Union more united than it is right now, and actually dealing together and quite effectively in a crisis. It did first so with COVID, now it has done so in the war in Ukraine, and it is doing so in the energy crisis. Number 4, call it democracy or not, but NATO. It is an alliance of democracies. It has been rejuvenated back to its original purpose from 1949, being a repellent to the Soviet Union. Some people had even called NATO brain dead. Some were skeptical about NATO, as Donald Trump was. And now suddenly it's an alliance which is really stronger than ever and needed more than ever. And it's getting two new members, Finland and Sweden, once Hungary and Turkey have hopefully ratified their membership. Number 5, the rejuvenation of the transatlantic partnership. Remember then when everyone thought that the US is going to pivot to the Indo-Pacific. Forget Europe. Well, not so anymore. The Biden administration and the rest of Europe have worked very well together. Number 6, Putin is losing. Remember, he's an autocrat. He's losing a war. He's losing an economic fight. He's losing popularity among his population. He did a huge mistake. He's not the strong man in town anymore, as opposed to what he was, the war in Georgia in 2008, or after he masterminded the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula. He has failed. He's losing. Number 7, Ukraine is winning. Democracy is better at engaging in war than on autocracy. Of course, with strong support from the West and elsewhere. But Ukraine is winning this war. Number 8, like it or not, the midterm elections in the United States, they weren't exactly a victory parade for the former President Donald Trump. And the Democrats were able to uphold the Senate. This is not a political statement, but what I'm saying is that some anti-democratic forces did not come out strong in these elections. Number 9, Bolsonaro is out in Brazil. He wasn't exactly your traditional Democrat with a small d. He was very much a nationalist and quite authoritarian in his way out. And number 10, my final point, is that China is actually looking quite weak. It's looking weak because its zero COVID policy has failed. And unfortunately, I predict that COVID will spin out of control in China, which will mean a lot of tragedy and death. And I feel very sad about that. But it shows that control doesn't work. China is looking weak, relatively speaking, economically, partially because of the COVID lockdowns, but partially because of the general economic situation. So my argument is that this year has been quite good for democracy and quite bad for autocracy. Of course, I don't mean to leave out the fact that some slightly non-democratic leaders have been elected or chosen as well. But I do think that what we're seeing right now, or what we saw in 2022, is that democracy is better at problem solving than autocracy. So I guess in that sense, Winston Churchill got it spot on when he said that democracy is the worst form of government except all the others. With these words, I do want to wish you a happy new year, and I hope that that new year will be prosperous and secure and peaceful for you and your family. We'll be back with more episodes about geopolitics with Alex, and I will spend my break writing a book on the new disorder, how conflict, competition, and cooperation shapes the 21st century. Have a good one. Thanks a lot.
America made its Declaration of Independence.